All right, the Constellation Season 1 finale is here, and we've got all the answers. Well, that's not true, but we do have more questions. And while I do think this episode's gonna leave a lot of people scratching their heads, I think I found something pretty big that might turn this entire show on its head, and it's something that only flashes on the screen for a brief moment, so I almost guarantee most people missed it. We'll talk about what that was later, so let's go ahead and jump in and break this thing down. The episode opens with really some of the most beautiful shots of the season as Joe's being taken to a treatment facility called St. Serguis, run by Irina and a bunch of nuns apparently. And while Joe's being carted back for treatment, she sees an image of Valia at her side. Next, we find Bud waking up in the snow outside the cabin, which I'm not even kidding when I say this is the most puzzling part of the finale to me. I mean, at the end of the last episode, we have the very emergency personnel that Henry arrived with, clearly aware of the fact that he's laying unconscious on the ground, but they just leave him there overnight and he doesn't freeze to death. I literally can't understand how this logically makes any sense. Seriously, why was he left there? Does anyone have a good answer for this? It was very hard for me to watch the rest of this episode because I couldn't get past it. I couldn't get past the question. Why is he there? Why didn't they take him with him? Anyway, let's move on. Bud takes the cowl, finds the tape recorder, and after playing back the recording of his space flight, destroys the cowl with an axe, which is obviously detrimental to the story because we know that this cowl device, we don't really actually know fully what it does. Anyway, while this is happening, we're also seeing images of Joe undergoing a kind of shock therapy called electroconvulsive therapy, which is used in patients with severe mania or schizophrenia. Later, they also perform an ultrasound that shows that Joe is pregnant, and the ultrasound was showing similar patterns to what we've seen caused by the cowl device in past episodes. But what I found most interesting here was the date on the ultrasound, and this is what I was talking about back at the beginning of my video that most people probably missed. The date here is February 1st, 2020, which would have been before the events of Joe's space mission. If this is accurate, this is now the third time frame in which this show takes place. We can see here in episode 3, where Joe is being questioned about what she saw up in space, that the footage is dated October 14th of 2021. Then in episode 6, we see that Paul's space mission footage showed a date of October 14th, 2023. But then in the finale, the FBI says that Bud shot Paul on November 8th of 2021. Now, I've personally felt that the date on Paul's space footage was just a continuity error, and maybe this ultrasound machine is another one. But if not, I'm not even sure what this means here. Somehow it means that Joe is at this facility with Irina before the events of her space mission, but is being treated for how things ended up after the mission?
Time is a flat circle.
Also, it means that Paul was in space in 2023, but was shot in 2021?
Flat circle.
Or maybe it all means Joe is actually a crazy person who underwent this shock therapy in 2020, and then everything that happened after was just made up in her mind.
No! God, please, no! No! No!
Personally, I think we could run down these rabbit holes for a while, but I truly believe these are just production continuity errors with these dates. I don't think we're actually jumping around in time, and that the events that we're seeing in this show all take place in a 5 to 6 week time frame. But I know that there are a lot of you that are theorizing that we are time jumping, so I am curious what you think about the date on this ultrasound machine. What does it mean to you, and what theories do you have? Let me know down in the comments. With all that out of the way, let's talk about Henry for a bit. We jump over to Henry, who's now back in his original universe, who's brought in on charges of murdering Ian Rogers and attempted murder for shooting Paul, where again, the FBI agent says both of these events occurred in October and November of 2021. Henry tries convincing them that he and Bud are different people with different DNA, and even takes a polygraph test in an attempt to prove this fact. But they later come back and tell him the polygraph doesn't matter, and that his DNA does in fact match what they found in Bud's apartment. We then jump over to Bud, and we see him meeting with Frederick, where he seems to imply that Joe was the one that destroyed the cowl, and Frederick apologizes and says that Joe is being treated. Later, Bud meets Irina for dinner, where she quickly senses something is different about Henry. Bud talks about how he remembers the details of Irina's space mission, but he remembers her suffocating in space, and that's when he tells her that he's not Henry, He's Bud. Irina says she can help him, but he takes no interest in the offer. Now during this scene, I started feeling like maybe this is more of a show focused on mental health and how now that Bud is off of his meds, his multiple personality disorder is taking over. This had me thinking that maybe this entire show is something fabricated in Henry's mind, but the more I thought about it, the more I talked myself out of this theory. For one, I just don't like it and think it makes for a bit of a lame ending, and furthermore, it just doesn't mesh well with everything else that's been going on in the show. So while it was sort of fun to explore, I don't think this is all in Henry's head. Back with Joe, Irina comes in for a visit and checks Joe's eyes when we see that her left pupil, the same one that was damaged on the other version of her, doesn't react to the light. Irina tries to persuade Joe to take her pills and breaks the news to her that she's pregnant, but Joe is only concerned about getting back to Alice. During this conversation, Joe grabs Irina's arm and sees her turn into Valia, finally connecting the dots that she is the same person. Ilya stops by later and says Irina isn't feeling well, so he's offered to help. He tells Joe she's experiencing burnout, which she doesn't like, and after arguing about Joe's mental state, she tells him to leave. On his way out, he slips her a key and hints that she needs to take a look at the man upstairs. So later, Joe sneaks out of her room, slips past a conveniently sleeping guard, and makes her way up to the other guest. She looks into the room to see two identical-looking men, with one of them saying "mama" over and over, which freaks her out quite a bit, and she heads back to her room where she seems to be having a change of heart after seeing the state of those men. And there is definitely something interesting about these men, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. The following day, Joe is playing the piano again, and we see a scene of Red Alice asking Blue Alice if Joe is with her, wondering if she really saw her out at the cabin, but Blue Alice never responds. Red Alice and Magnus finish packing up their house, and as they're leaving for the last time, Alice says there's another Alice out there that got her mom, and she can't be angry about that. Magnus takes this as a child's way of processing loss and tells her she's brave for doing so. And this appears to be the conclusion of the Red Alice story, as she accepts the reality of her situation and appears to be moving on. Back with Joe, she asks Irina who the men are upstairs, and Irina says there's only one man and that he was the first man in space, and goes on to say that Joe needs to take her meds, play the piano, and live her life, or she will break in two. Now, there are clearly two dudes in the room upstairs, so is Irina saying that Joe will literally break into two people because of what happened in space? This was a very confusing detail for me because Joe saw two men and we saw two men, but then Irina says there's just one, but then insinuates Joe will break into two. Is this some kind of fallout of quantum entanglement that without lithium, two living particles will find their way back to one another? I'm not sure, but when we look at the two men upstairs, the one on the right is calm and speaks just one word, while the one on the left is much more frantic, saying mama over and over, and also has scarring and injuries on his forehead where the other one does not. This definitely makes me think there really are two men in that room, but I guess we'll never know for sure. And this is another aspect of the episode where I definitely want to hear your thoughts. So what did you all make of the two men upstairs? What are you thinking that it means? Are there two men? Is there one guy? Let me know what you're thinking down in the comments. Joe goes on to ask Irina if there are two of her and Irina, one dead and one alive. Irina says it basically doesn't matter and that Joe just needs to accept what has happened and move on because whatever it is, it cannot be undone. Ever. Later, Blue Alice and Magnus pay Joe a visit, and Alice says she feels that the other Alice is okay with Joe being there with her. Alice then says she needs a mom, and Joe says she needs an Alice, and they seem to agree to try to move forward together. Joe then meets with Magnus and shows him the drawing Alice did of the Valia, then ultimately says she's going to move on. She says she'll take the pills if it means things will go back to normal and she can go home, and they talk about the baby briefly as well. We then see Irina sending an email admitting that the space agencies have been covering up the fact that astronauts often come back from space with these issues. Next, we see Paul waking up in the hospital saying, "I've seen something," so I'm guessing this paired with the email Irina sent is mostly a setup for the next season of this show. Back outside St. Serguis, Joe and Magnus patch things up, and Irina introduces herself to Alice, closing the door for Alice on the mystery behind the Valia's identity. Alice asks Joe if what happened and you're from there and we're from here, where's the baby going to be from? And the season concludes with a shot of Blue Joe back up in the space station grabbing the iPad and looking into the camera with her one remaining eye. Okay, before my review, a quick plug for the upcoming live stream this Thursday night at 9 p.m. Central Time, where we'll hang out, discuss this show, and talk about upcoming shows that we're excited about. These are always a lot of fun, so I hope to see you there, and if you want to be there, be sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out. Okay, so I watched this finale with my buddy, and as soon as it ended, his exact words were, "Wait, it's really over?" Followed by, "Well, there goes 8 hours of my life I'll never get back." And while I don't feel that the entire show was a waste, I'm certainly not super happy with the finale that we got here. Yes, this show was a very complex one with quantum entanglement and superpositioning, but that doesn't mean it's okay to just leave everything wide open, in my opinion. A couple of my biggest questions here still center around the Cal device and the lithium. Okay, watching this back over the edit, I realize I missed a really big other question, which is Jo up in the space station. Is she alive? Is she dead? Probably both, going back to the Schrodinger's cat thing. But now that she's got this iPad, what is she gonna do? Is she gonna try to FaceTime call her daughter? I don't know. What are the implications of Jo still being kind of alive? What this final scene we see with her in the space station, I don't know what that means. Again, I think this is another cliffhanger that's probably just setting us up for the next season. Certainly raises a lot of questions in my mind, none of which I have any answers for. So definitely let me know what you're thinking of Jo's status in the space station. All right, now we'll talk about the Cal device. We still don't fully know what the Cal was doing throughout the show. We were told it's a quantum experiment that's supposed to capture a quantum superposition where one thing can exist in two places at the same time. So there's a lot of assumptions that we're having to make about this device. Was it actually causing crossover events to occur, or was it just observing the crossover events and then recording it? It certainly seems like it played a part in Bud and Henry crossing over, and now that Bud has destroyed the device, it can't happen again. But again, these are all assumptions we're having to make, which it's kind of annoying that we're having to do it still after the finale. Peter Harness, the creator of Constellation, was interviewed by Screen Rant, and he says, what we've tried to stick to is two mirror universes with a slightly distorted mirror, which would be the liminal space, and a kind of crossing point in between that maybe the Cal has something to do with. Well, I know that it does, and then he laughs. I don't know if I'm just dense, but it didn't seem super obvious to me that the Cal was the crossing point between these two universes. And the main reason I struggle to grasp that is, why did the crossover events happen before the Cal device even existed? Is he saying here that the Cal device is just another crossing point, not that it's the crossing point? I'm assuming that's what he's meaning here, but again, more assumptions. It would just be nice to have a little bit more clarity around these key components of this story. Then we have the lithium, where we still have limited understanding. We know that only astronauts experiencing burnout are prescribed it, and we assume it dulls the effects or limits the ability to see into alternate universes. But is that it? Does not taking it allow a person like Bud and Henry to be more likely to switch back? And of course, one of the other big questions that we're left with here is Jo's new pregnancy. From a timeline perspective, it does seem that this Jo got pregnant after returning back to this wrong universe, meaning Blue Magnus and Red Jo conceived this child, which probably explains the strange looking ultrasound. But like Alice, I do wonder what this means for this baby being born into this universe where it half belongs and half doesn't. This is the type of open-ended question that I don't mind. It's not part of the fundamental concepts of the story. It's just an open story loop that's going to make us want to come back for another season. And quite honestly, without something like this at the end of the season, I don't know that I'd have a lot of interest in a season 2. Ultimately, I have mixed feelings because I really enjoyed episodes 1 through 7. I feel like it had so much potential, and then it just didn't stick the landing here in episode 8. I feel like for me and quite a few others, this finale is just going to leave a bit of a bad taste after such an enjoyable season. I think we're probably looking at a solid 6.5 or 7 out of 10, and had the finale been better, this would probably fall in the 8 to 8.5 out of 10 range for me. All right, that does it for me. Let me know your thoughts of the finale down in the comments, and I hope to see you in future videos. Thanks for watching. See you next time.